Hi everyone, it's Ren here. I hope you're doing well, and in this video, in this kind of new environment, which you're not used to, I will be just talking a little bit about this question of postmodernism, because it's been like circling around my mind quite a bit. This idea that postmodernism is kind of associated with the radical left in the United States in particular, which, obviously the United States at the moment in the Western world really seem to be kind of like the crucible, the forefront of like embodied political thought and crossing with philosophical thought and currents of thinking. So it's weird because you hear Jordan Peterson, among other people, and people who sort of are seen as the enemies of what they call radical left, claim that postmodernism is associated with the left. And it seems to be something quite prevalent in the United States. It's only something I'm realizing myself recently because I'm not in the US. But in this video, I would like to talk a bit about this idea of postmodernism and the left, because in my view, personally, I think that postmodernism is actually not a left-wing ideology friendly theory or current of thinking, if you like. Of course it can also be right-wing, in fact, and I thought that it might be useful to sort of try to explain why I think that. Well, again, for the kind of left-wing thinking that is associated with revolutionary, progressive sort of thinking, you need to have a sort of belief in a particular narrative that you want to orient yourself towards, and you need to have an end goal, right? Well, the fact of the matter is, in postmodernism, there is no possible validity of these narratives towards those goals, because if you like, the very meaning that would embody the articulation of those narratives is unstable. If you like, for example, this thing, I don't even know what that is. Let's call it a box, right? So the sign box is, the word box is the sign that corresponds to the object, okay? So there's a link between the word box and what it denotes, which is the object that I've got in my hand. Well, if you like, in postmodernism, a great aspect of it is that it contests the idea that the link that connects the signifier and the signified is a stable one. So it's not so much that it questions the whole idea of truth, but I think it questions the fact that, like, signifiers, the words that we use in our discourse, have a stable denotation, that have a stable signified reference. And actually, the more extreme postmodernists say that a lot of signifiers or words are merely floating discourse that is completely disembodied and does not have a corresponding reality at all. You see that in the work of Jean Baudrillard, for example. He talks about the simulacrum to refer to the sort of empty vessel sign. And as a matter of fact, these postmodernists are often seen as reactionaries, not at all as hard left revolutionaries or even reformist, because, like I said, in order to sort of launch into this kind of idea of reform, you need to believe that the signified is stable. Because if the signified is not stable, if the signifier does not always relate to the same kind of signified, it means that your purpose, what you want to achieve, whether it's the communist state or equal rights, for example, say like for minorities, right, which seems to be like a big hot topic of discussion. Well, you cannot really launch into an emancipatory movement, because even that very idea, that very concept, that very notion that drives you and that you're oriented towards is unstable as a sort of end goal, as a reference. And in the work of postmodernists, you get this real sense of the contextual discourse surrounding you, which is not in the individual, is actually sort of supervening upon the free will of the individual. Like postmodernism has not a lot of interest in the question of free will. So there's no real question of like an individual bringing about a particular state of affairs, or a collection of individuals coming together as a tribe or whatever to bring about a state of affairs because they want to assert power. That is not really something that can be understood in that sense in postmodernism, because the discourse, the way that signs relate to us are they're preponderant over the choices that we make, and the sort of periphery of action that is available to us is actually quite micro-limited. It is a kind of act of resistance that we can perform, but it is usually through like independence, developing communities that are localized and that try to distance themselves from the universe of discourse. And you see that, or little like glimpses at that in the works of Derrida or Foucault, even though the two authors themselves are very, very, very different. Foucault, in fact, like was definitely not a Marxist. Clearly said he differed from Marxism, and like none of his work is Marxist. And Derrida the same. You know, they're authors who focus a lot of their attention on the text and on interpretation, but they would in no way support the idea that all that matters in the world is power, and asserting your group identity is power, because they would say power itself is implicitly reliant upon a narrative of how to gain that power and why that power is important. And that's not something that postmodernists defend at all. Like, the critique that could be leveled against the postmodernists, in my opinion, is rather than promoting the idea that everything is power, is to say, well, they think that what's outside us has like preponderant power over the definition and the articulation of our ever-shifting identities and personalities, meaning that it could be the equivalent of inciting people to just accepting the state of affairs, the proliferation of signs that do not actually refer to anything anymore, and to accept capitalism. The main critique that has been leveled against postmodernism is that it would tend to encourage people to inaction and to just enjoy the proliferation of what's around us for what it is, because there's no possibility of true revolt and true resurgence of power, because these are implicitly framed in meta-narratives which are themselves no longer believable, no longer credible, and only an illusion of the extension of human will. So that was the argument I wanted to make for postmodernism not being at all intrinsically a left-wing friendly theory. See you guys.